Well, hey there. If we haven't yet met, my name's Alex Judd, and I had the privilege of hosting our recent virtual owner event with Bryan and Shannon Miles. And specifically, we kind of organized this virtual event to look at the topics and themes that so often business owners experience, but rarely have a place to actually talk about openly, honestly, and with vulnerability. And man, it was such a powerful 60 minutes. The engagement of the crew that was there was so good. But we know that there were a handful of y'all that weren't able to get in there or that weren't able to attend but did want to get the content. And so the team did a really great job of piecing together some of the really critical moments from the virtual event that we did. And I just wanted to walk you through these moments because I think that there's both practical applications that business owners can draw from what we're about to walk through, but also heart level, soul level applications that can really impact the way that you approach, view your business, your team, and your leadership. And so let's set up the first clip. In this first section, we went deep fast because Bryan and Shannon discussed a topic that, if you spend any time around them, you've heard them use this phrase before. It's the dark night of the soul. That's that moment where, man, as a business owner, you can lack momentum. You can feel isolated. You can feel like everything's going against you and no one quite empathizes or understands. And one of the things that we've recognized in just spending time with business owners is this is a common experience. This isn't just an isolated experience. So I want you to hear you're not alone. But then beyond that, one of the things that we wanted to get into is what are strategies? What are the things that you can do to wade through and wrestle through and ultimately get to the other side of that dark night of the soul? Let's jump right in. What do you do in those seasons whenever it's like, man, in some ways you need more passion and energy than ever, but it's harder to muster than it's ever been. And in some ways it can feel very isolating. It feels like this isn't going to work. You've lost hope. And in some ways you feel like you're the only one. That's that dark night of the soul. What is y'all's playbook for those seasons? What do you do in those seasons?
I I turn to literature. Honestly, I read books to try to dig myself out of my hole, my emotional hole, my mental my mental blocks that I have and just find a different perspective, something that's inspiring to me. Maybe it's somebody else's story arc. Maybe, I mean, my first Dark Night of the Soul, really where I got to the place where belay grew, where I felt like it was past my ability to lead. And I felt completely like an imposter. I felt like I was going to be found out, and at some point somebody was going to come and take away the keys to the to the business and say, "You're done here. That was cute." And I didn't, I felt so completely ill-equipped to lead. I turned to the gifts of imperfection. I was talking to my high school, or sorry, my college roommate, and she recommended the book to me. And that was years ago, when Brene Brown's work first started to become part of the zeitgeist. But I read it and it gave me permission to not have to have all of the answers and to not have to feel completely equipped to do the role that I was doing alongside Bryan with the company and embrace the imperfections. So that was an example of one of the writings that I turned to for that. But that's usually like my first go-to thing. Sometimes it's devotional. I'm a big podcast person, so I look for inspirational podcasts too. But any outside perspective that gets me out of my own head. I'm not a verbal processor. I don't want to talk to anybody necessarily about it. I'd rather just crawl into my metaphorical hole and figure out a way to dig myself out. That's my approach.
Hmm.
How about you,
Bryan,
Bryan?
I've got a funny feeling, Bryan, that this might not be one where you say what she said. Like I do the exact same thing. So,
No.
Bryan, what is your approach to those seasons?
It is different than Shannon. For me, I reach out to those who I give permission to speak into my life from a mentoring standpoint. So I reach out to my mentors and to people that I have allowed them permission to speak into my life, and I talk to them and I ask them questions and I listen to them mostly. Um, and then on top of that, I try really hard to find others to pour into.
Mm.
because in the sense of like I will look for, a guy that is, maybe a couple seasons behind me so that I can then, be honest about, hey, this is the struggles of where I'm at and this is where I'm headed. And so I will do that. I will double down often on my workout schedule in terms of my body and making sure I'm taking care of it. And the human side of this as well. I'm probably gonna get really irritated with myself for a while. If I'm being honest, I'm gonna wallow in that a little bit. But at the end of the day, in those deep seasons, I think that there's a lot of self-reflection that's necessary, and that comes in the form of sitting down and having conversations with people that you trust, journaling,
Yeah, journaling.
obviously prayer or meditation, super important. And those are things that I do personally.
Okay, the second topic that Bryan and Shannon got into was the topic of comparison. And specifically, we kind of framed it as the comparison trap. And what I so appreciate about the advice that Bryan and Shannon give in this clip is how nuanced it is. So often, what we see and what we hear today is that you should avoid comparison because comparison is the thief of joy. And yeah, that's reality, right? We know that comparison is a thief of joy. However, as a business owner, you don't have the luxury of just getting to close your eyes to the marketplace and not pay attention to what everyone else is doing. So, if you've got to live and lead with your eyes wide open, how do you make sure that you stay centered and wise without being obsessed with everything that's going on around you? That's some of what they get into in this clip. Here we go.
So we own a brewery and distillery. We started it in 2018, opened in 19, closed briefly for COVID. Thank God we live in Georgia, opened it back up again pretty early on. And we anticipated some things in the market that just the market has changed in the last few years since we've had that business. So we're constantly benchmarking and looking around at, what are larger breweries doing? And there's just no playbook sometimes for how to do your business. And there's no, like, I look at an organization like Creature and Creature Come First, and like they've taken on millions of dollars of investment that is just one way to grow a business and to be the brand that you kind of see everywhere. And yeah, part of me is like, gosh, that should be us. But it's like, wait a second, that's not the game we're out here to play. What we're doing is building something different. We're building something that's serving our communities, and we're building an international pathway that, as far as we can tell, nobody else has done. So I think for me, the comparison, I think it's important to pay attention to competition. I think it's important to pay attention to your industries, obviously, and know what's going on, but to make seismic shifts in your business just to try to mimic someone else has never worked for us. And it would feel disingenuous too. Because I think that if you have the ability to be the best in the world and you can define what your world is, that's where you should focus, not getting distracted by, everybody else's cool new thing that they're doing. And one way that I like to put this is like, as a business owner, you have the opportunity to create your own gravitational force. You can create the organization that's attractive, that brings people who want to be part of your culture, that brings the right kind of clients walking through your door or engaging with your organization. So if you're constantly changing who you are or comparing yourself to somebody else, you're not allowing that gravitational force to do its job, and it takes time. So that would be my answer to it. How about you?
Once again, she's so articulate. But for me, I do pay close attention to competition, and I think you should do that. I think that, that you can learn a lot from your competition, and you can learn how to like benchmark against them in a lot of different ways. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'd highly encourage that. But when I look out and you see folks progress, most of that progress comes in the form of social media or through marketing. like, you learn about other people's success by what you see that's mostly thrown at you via social media. You don't see people's success on a billboard or a mailer at your house. You see it in places that you look for it. And so you go to these places almost, just for comparison's sake. And so this is what I would tell you is that those people, like when you hear, like the question is, how do I stay grounded on my own path when everyone else's progress feels louder than my own? Is that you remember that the noise isn't the same as momentum.
Yes.
It's your momentum, and your path was never supposed to be theirs. Your path is supposed to be your path. And stop basically looking at the crap on social media for comparison, because it's just not helpful. And when I see a friend of mine, I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'd be like, wow, they're on a jet now. I mean, like, how did they do that? And it's like it's just like this comparison thing that's just completely unnecessary, and it sends you in the wrong direction. It sends you sideways for what you need to be doing in your business to create your own path. So um, that's kind of how I approach it now. As I realize most of the stuff I'm seeing is marketing, and it's good stuff, but it's marketing, and it is louder, and most of it's on social, and you have to dial out that stuff. You have to push that stuff away and really go, okay, what's really real here about my progress and the things I'm doing.
Okay, the next topic that we're going to dive into is one that has been really practically helpful for me as a business owner, and it's kind of putting our thumb on something that most business owners will feel the need or experience the need to engage with, and that's the idea of having a re-up moment. If you've been in business for a while, you know that there will be seasons. Bryan and Shannon actually refer to them in the documentary and in the first two seasons, if you've watched those, as chasms, right? Where it's like when we look at what's ahead in the future for this business, it's not going to be status quo effort, status quo energy, status quo intellect, status quo passion that's going to get us from here to there. It's a chasm, right? However, if you've been doing this for 5, 10, 15 years and you approach a chasm, it's like what you really need in that moment is 15-year wisdom, but first-year energy, passion, enthusiasm, and courage. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the things that Bryan and Shannon have taught me is that there's so much value in having a re-up, in recommitting yourself to what you're doing and re-anchoring yourself to why you're doing it. That's what we get into here in this section.
It's, a book that we reference in our guidebook is Scaling Up, and it talks about the valleys of death in there. And it's one of my favorite books on scaling business. But what we've experienced in our business at times is that 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, and 50 million, there's these valleys of death that seem to happen around those stages of annual income. And they are natural re-up moments in a business. They are a re-up of the founders saying, you know what, am I happy with this business and can I keep going? There's managers in the business that go, man, I remember this when it was back then, and it's changed on me now. And then you have employees that go, hey, we don't feel the same anymore. The culture's changing or whatever. There's all these natural re-up moments across the whole organization when you grow your business, and that's very normal. And the other thing is you have to, as a business owner, it's sometimes hard to swallow, but not everybody that starts with you is going to end with you. And I took it really personal in the early days of our business, but now I just understand that that's just the way it is, that not everyone that starts something with you is going to end with you. And you got to be comfortable with that, because they're having a re-up moment on their own based on the decisions you're making as the business owner. And so when you're saying, hey, I have really something really exciting to share with you guys, typically this is the thing I don't want you to miss. When you communicate change in your business, that becomes a natural re-up moment in their life, because they decide I am for this or I'm not for it. And so it's very important that you understand, like, change is part of the re-up side of it, and especially around those annual income dips, the valleys of death that are there. Um, they they're actually good for the business, because what it does is it promotes potentially a new leader that comes in. It can help you scale to the next level. It gives you new lifeblood and employees that maybe have lost their passion around your business a little bit. It's a good thing too. But it is something that change especially creates a catalytic moment in your business.
Okay, this next clip is so good because it's actually Lindsay Sulik, who is a business owner that was actually mentored by Bryan and Shannon for years. She ran her company for years, and now she's strictly an owner of her company. Her husband runs the company as CEO. But she talks about what a dark night of the soul looked like for her and what her re-up moment looked like. And man, we did takeaways at the end of the session. Everyone like above and beyond. This was one of the biggest takeaways from the session was um, thinking critically in those moments about what's the story that I want to tell and recognizing that we're all operating in sync with a narrative, and that narrative, the story you live in is the story you live out. And so, man, this advice from Lindsay is like the type of advice that you can only get from someone that's walked through it. And so I'm excited for y'all to see this clip.
You guys pulled me out of a dark night of the soul.
Yes.
Single
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah,
Hello,
context
Bryan and
on
Shannon.
Lindsay as well. Lindsay, I mean, I would assume the Dark Night of the Soul, or one of them for you, was you owned a luxury travel agency, and then COVID, this thing called COVID happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, give us a little bit of insight into like how do you navigate that and what do you do?
Yeah. Phil, when you said your business was decimated during COVID, I felt that in my soul. And my husband and I run my business together. We still own it to this day. And we survived COVID. It made us stronger, thankfully. But that was a very intense dark night of the soul where we would open up a spreadsheet that he created every day. We called it Project Slim Fast. And it was all about like, how do we reduce our expenses so that we actually have a run rate to keep this business alive? And I remember hearing a sermon from Andy Stanley, for anyone who's familiar with Andy Stanley, really early on in that season, where he talked about when you're in moments of crisis, one of the most clarifying questions you can ask yourself is, what story do I want to tell? You know, on the other side of this, if I could create the narrative for myself. And that empowered us so much. And I remember we would go back to that question when we would just be like wrestling through this. We were also expecting our first child in the middle of this season, and we would be like, oh, should we just press the big red easy button and have him go back to work and us close this business down? We kept going, okay, but the story we want to tell is one of survival. And the story we want to tell is one of faith and is one of holding out through the storm. And I'm really, really proud to say that that's now the story that we tell. I don't know that had we not continuously asked ourselves that question, we would be telling that story. It gives you more power back and shows you what is in your control.
Okay, and then finally, we just closed out with Bryan and Shannon with some words of encouragement. And so I want y'all to internalize these. I want you to hear these because if you're like me, there are seasons of your business and seasons of your leadership and your life where these messages are something that, man, if you're not careful, they are for you, but they'll go right past you. And so take time, slow down, really internalize these, and then we'll close out on the other side.
As I've had the opportunity with Shannon to literally work alongside of thousands of business owners, especially via Belay, your work, what you do every day, is insanely important for a lot of reasons. Your families, obviously, but you are the backbone of this economy. You're the backbone of how capitalism and business works in our country, and the power to create a job, just even one job, the power to create one job or multiple jobs is of high calling. And it's incredibly hard. And so I would just encourage you that what you do every day is more than the thing that you think you do. You provide income to people, and you provide a livelihood with a paycheck, and you also provide people with meaning for the work that they do, because work is very important. So I would just encourage you, wherever you are right now, whether you're in the highest of highs or the lowest of lows, to just know that what you do every day truly does matter. Where in your community, in your family, and you've got people at Owner and peers from inside of Owner that are cheering you on, and you're incredibly important to this world and into so many people.
And because I believe all of that to be true, it is also extremely important to take care of yourself. And it's okay to rest. And it's okay to take vacation. And Bryan, thank you for being an example of taking a sabbatical. Welcome back from that. Crushing some content on sabbatical. Like those things are important. Nobody's going to force you to do that. And you don't want to wait until your body gives you no other choice but to rest. We know that you're driven. You wouldn't have started a business if you weren't. So sometimes the harder work is to balance that drive with taking care of yourself, resting, and that can be your form of resistance to the capitalistic society that we're all a big part of.
Well, thanks so much for watching this recap. I know that it's the intention of the entire owner team that this would add value to you. Hey, I want to make sure that you are engaged with everything that the owner team is doing because they're providing so much valuable content and there's more big plans on the way. So if you're not yet part of the Safe Harbor community, that's just, it's kind of the ground floor of what Bryan Shannon and the owner team are building. This is a place where we're building a community of business owners who are committed to doing business with other people that really want to engage with these tough questions, these tough topics in a healthy way. And so the place where that's going to start happening and is happening is the Owner Safe Harbor. That's also where you're going to get access to the first 2 seasons that Bryan and Shannon recorded. And what's so cool is Owner operates as a nonprofit. So you get to decide what you want to donate to that nonprofit to perpetuate the mission forward. And for donation of any amount, you get access to all of that content, which is, I mean, mind-blowing because the value of the advice that is in those 2 seasons is just wild. But then beyond that, you're also going to be the first to know about the next virtual events that are coming up and live events that the team is looking forward to planning and all of that. That's actually the second thing we want to make sure you're aware of is that the next virtual event is planned. It's on the books for November, so be on the lookout for that. Make sure you get signed up. We'd obviously love to have you there on that event so we can go further and deeper on these subjects. Y'all, I hope you know this. We are in your corner. Let's go.